What if I told you that Oldsmobile built an engine so advanced, so powerful, that General Motors killed it before it could rewrite history? The W-43 wasn't just another V8. It was a 455 cubic inch DOHC monster with 4 valves per cylinder, decades ahead of anything Detroit had ever seen. It had the power to dominate NASCAR, embarrass the Hemi, and make the Corvette look outdated. But instead of unleashing it, GM erased it from existence. Why? Because it was too powerful, too innovative, and too dangerous for their own lineup. This is the shocking truth behind the W-43. The late 1960s were a battlefield. The muscle car war was raging, and every automaker was in a horsepower arms race. Chrysler had the 426 Hemi, Ford had the Boss 429, and Chevrolet had the L88 427. But deep inside Oldsmobile's engineering division, something far more radical was taking shape. A 455 cubic inch, dual overhead cam, DOHC V8 with 4 valves per cylinder. This wasn't just another big block. This was an engineering masterpiece that no other American manufacturer dared to attempt. With its advanced design, the W-43 was capable of over 500 horsepower in factory form, and much more with tuning. It could breathe better, rev higher, and make traditional pushrod V8s look like relics. It was the kind of technology found in European race cars, not Detroit muscle. So why did General Motors kill it? Because this engine was too good for its time. If Oldsmobile unleashed the W-43, it would have shattered performance records, embarrassed GM's other divisions, and forced a complete industry shift. The power was real, the potential was limitless, and the fear of what it could do sealed its fate before it ever hit the streets. The W-43 wasn't just another muscle car engine, it was a revolution in American performance. While Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler were perfecting their pushrod V8s, Oldsmobile engineers were thinking bigger. They knew the future wasn't in traditional big blocks, it was in cutting-edge technology that could take Detroit muscle into the next era. Oldsmobile had already shocked the industry with the Turbo Rocket V8 and the first production turbocharged car, but the W-43 was their most ambitious project yet. A 455 cubic inch DOHC V8 with 4 valves per cylinder. This was technology you'd expect in Ferrari or Jaguar race cars, not an Oldsmobile. With better airflow, higher RPM potential, and massive power gains, the W-43 could have been the most dominant American engine ever built. It wasn't a concept, it was real. Dyno tests suggested over 500 horsepower, and with tuning, it could have easily surpassed the Hemi, the LS6454, or anything Ford had on the table. But before it could be mass-produced, the corporate suits stepped in. The W-43 was too powerful, too advanced, and GM executives weren't about to let Oldsmobile become the performance king of Detroit. Oldsmobile had created a monster, a double overhead cam 455 V8 that could leave everything else in the dust. But there was one problem. It was too powerful for General Motors' corporate hierarchy to handle. At the time, GM had a strict internal pecking order when it came to performance. Chevrolet was the golden child, the division that got the best engines, the best racing support, and the most attention. Pontiac, Buick, and Oldsmobile were allowed to build performance cars, but only if they didn't overshadow the Corvette or Camaro. And here was Oldsmobile, a brand known for luxury, about to launch an engine that could embarrass GM's entire lineup. The W-43 wasn't just another high-performance V8. It was so advanced that it made the Corvette's 427 look outdated. If this engine made it into production, the Corvette wouldn't be GM's flagship performance car anymore. Even worse, it could have forced a complete overhaul of GM's racing and street performance strategy. The corporate suits weren't about to let that happen. Instead of celebrating the W-43 as the future of American muscle, they buried it. The engine that could have changed everything was erased before it had the chance to dominate. The W-43 wasn't just another high-performance engine, it was a threat to the entire muscle car hierarchy. If Oldsmobile had released this DOHC 455 V8, it would have redefined American performance and sent shockwaves through the industry. Imagine this. While Ford and Chrysler were still relying on pushrod technology, Oldsmobile was about to launch a 4-valve per-cylinder, dual overhead cam beast, a setup commonly found in Ferrari, Porsche, and Formula One cars. The muscle car wars would have been over before they even started. No more big block versus small block debates. The W-43 would have obliterated the Hemi, the Boss 429, and the LS6 454. And that's exactly why it was stopped. It was too advanced for its time. GM didn't want to force Ford and Chrysler to evolve. They didn't want to risk changing the muscle car formula too quickly. They needed to keep things simple. Big cubes, push rods, and aggressive marketing. The W-43, it was too smart, too advanced, and too much of a risk to the status quo. So instead of revolutionizing the industry, GM made sure it never left the test lab. The future of American muscle was locked away forever. Here's where the story of the W-43 takes an even darker turn. This engine wasn't just a concept, it was built, tested, and ready to be unleashed. Oldsmobile engineers had developed working prototypes, and some claim it even saw track testing, but then it vanished. According to insiders, at least 2 prototypes of the W-43 were fully assembled and running. One was tested extensively, showing mind-blowing horsepower figures, rumored to be well over 500 horsepower in factory form. But just as things were getting serious, the corporate axe fell. The W-43 was ordered to be destroyed. Some say GM executives had it scrapped, eliminating all traces of its existence. Others believe one of the engines was quietly hidden away in an Oldsmobile testing facility. And then there's the most shocking rumor of all, that one W-43 prototype survived and is still out there, tucked away in a private collection or deep within GM's archives. If true, this means one of the greatest lost engines in muscle car history might still exist, waiting to be rediscovered. But why did GM go to such lengths to erase it? What were they so afraid of? The answers only get crazier. The W-43 wasn't just a streetcar engine, it was built with racing in mind. If it had made it onto the track, it could have changed the face of NASCAR forever. During the late 60s and early 70s, NASCAR was dominated by Ford's Boss 429, Chrysler's 426 HEMI, and Chevy's 427 Big Block. These engines were powerful, but they all had one thing in common: pushrod technology. The W-43, it was light years ahead. With dual overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder, it would have made every other V8 on the grid obsolete. This engine would have been a game changer. It could rev higher, breathe better, and make more power with less effort than anything NASCAR had ever seen. Ford and Chrysler would have had to scramble to develop similar tech just to keep up, but GM didn't want that. Instead of pushing Oldsmobile to the top of the NASCAR world, they shut it down before it could make history. Some believe NASCAR itself pressured GM to cancel it, fearing the W-43 would dominate too easily. Was it banned before it even got the chance to compete? Or did GM sabotage its own greatest weapon? The W-43 wasn't just a threat to General Motors, it was a threat to the entire muscle car industry. If Oldsmobile had released this engine, it wouldn't have just dominated GM's own brands, it would have humiliated Ford and Chrysler. Think about it. The 426 Hemi and Boss 429 were the kings of their time, but they were still using outdated pushrod technology. The W-43's dual overhead cam DOHC setup and 4 valves per cylinder meant it could rev higher, breathe better, and make more power with less strain. It wasn't just better, it was decades ahead. And that's where the conspiracy theories start. Some believe Ford and Chrysler caught wind of Oldsmobile's secret project and pushed for its demise. NASCAR had already outlawed the mystery 427 Mark II from Chevrolet in 1963. Could Ford and Chrysler have lobbied NASCAR and GM executives to make sure the W-43 suffered the same fate? It sounds crazy, but think about what was at stake. The W-43 wasn't just another V8, it was a revolution. If it had been released, it could have forced every other manufacturer to rethink performance forever, and that was something Detroit just wasn't ready for. Oldsmobile engineers knew they had built something special. The W-43 wasn't just another big block V8, it was a technological leap forward, and they fought desperately to save it. When GM executives ordered the project shut down, Oldsmobile didn't give up immediately. Engineers pushed back, arguing that the W-43 could be a Corvette killer, a NASCAR dominator, and a muscle car icon all at once. They believed that this engine could redefine American performance. But GM had already made up its mind. Instead of letting Oldsmobile unleash the W-43, they threw them a consolation prize, the W-30. The W-3455 was a solid engine, but it was nothing compared to the W-43's DOHC design. It was just another pushrod V8. Still powerful, but far from the game-changing technology Oldsmobile had been working toward. It was a crushing defeat. The engineers who had poured years into developing the W-43 had to watch as their greatest creation was buried. The technology was there. The power was real. The potential was limitless. But corporate politics had won. The greatest Oldsmobile engine ever built was gone, or so we thought, because rumors still swirl that at least one prototype survived hidden away. One of the biggest arguments GM executives used to justify killing the W-43 was cost. They claimed that a dual overhead cam DOHC V8 with 4 valves per cylinder was simply too expensive to mass produce. But was that really the truth? Or was it just an excuse to keep Oldsmobile in its place? It's true that DOHC engines are more complex. They require more moving parts, tighter tolerances, and more advanced manufacturing techniques. But let's not forget, this was the same era when GM was spending millions developing high-performance big blocks, rotary engines, and experimental aluminum V8s. If they could afford to develop those, why not the W-43? The reality is that Oldsmobile's engineers had already solved many of the production challenges. They had built working prototypes. They had proven it could be done. And yet, GM pulled the plug. So, was cost really the issue? Or was the real problem that a DOHC 455 would have completely outshined Chevrolet's flagship performance engines? If cost was the issue, why did GM later use similar technology in Cadillac and Chevrolet performance cars? The truth is, the W-43 wasn't too expensive. It was just too powerful for GM to control. Here's where the story gets even more unbelievable. GM didn't just kill the W-43, they stole its technology and used it years later. Think about it. The W-43 was a dual overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder, V8, technology that didn't appear in any American production cars at the time. Yet, a few decades later, GM suddenly started using DOHC V8s in Cadillac, Chevrolet, and Pontiac models. Coincidence? Not a chance. In the 1990s, GM introduced the Cadillac Northstar 5.8, a double overhead cam 4.6-liter engine with 4 valves per cylinder. It was marketed as cutting-edge engineering, but in reality, it was built on the same principles that Oldsmobile had pioneered with the W-43 decades earlier. Even Chevrolet's modern LS-based V8s have incorporated design improvements that trace back to Oldsmobile's secret project. GM didn't just bury the W-43, they kept its secrets for themselves. Instead of letting Oldsmobile lead the muscle car revolution, they shut it down and slowly repurposed its technology over time. The W-43 wasn't a failure, it was a blueprint for the future that GM made sure nobody remembered. But now, the truth is finally coming out. The W-43 wasn't just a sketch on a drafting board, it was built, tested, and nearly ready for production. So here's the million-dollar question. What happened to the actual engines? Officially, GM claims the prototypes were destroyed. After the project was canceled, they supposedly scrapped every trace of the W-43 to ensure it never saw the light of day. But that explanation doesn't sit right. Why go to such extreme lengths to erase an engine if it wasn't a threat? According to insiders, at least 2 working W-43 engines were built. One of them was rumored to be in an Oldsmobile test car, where it shocked engineers with its power. The other? That's where the mystery begins. Some say it was destroyed, but others believe it was saved in secret. There have been whispers that one W-43 still exists today, hidden away in a private collection deep in GM's archives, or even locked away in a forgotten warehouse. Could this legendary engine still be out there, waiting to be discovered? If it is, it would be one of the greatest finds in automotive history. The W-43 may have been erased from official records, but its legend refuses to die. The W-43 wasn't just a wild idea, it was inches away from full production. Oldsmobile engineers had done the impossible. They had built a fully functional dual overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder, 455 V8 that could have rewritten the rules of American performance. The engine was tested, refined, and according to some sources, installed in prototype vehicles. So how close did we really get? Closer than most people realize. In 1971, Oldsmobile was preparing for a limited production run of W-43 equipped cars. The goal? To unleash it in homologation models for racing, much like Ford had done with the Boss 429. It would have been the ultimate muscle car weapon, a factory-built rocket ship that could dominate the streets and the track. But at the last moment, GM executives shut it down. Some say it was due to rising insurance rates on high-performance cars. Others blame new emissions regulations. But the truth? The W-43 was just too powerful, too advanced, and too disruptive to the industry. It wasn't canceled because it failed. It was canceled because it would have succeeded too well. The ultimate Oldsmobile engine was silenced, but not forgotten. Imagine an alternate timeline where Oldsmobile wasn't held back. A world where the W-43 wasn't canceled, where GM didn't play corporate politics, and where this DOHC 455 V8 hit the streets in full production. The muscle car wars would have been over before they even started. The Boss 429, the 426 Hemi, the LS 6454, all of them would have been left in the dust. The W-43 was designed to rev higher, breathe better, and produce more power than any pushrod V8 of its time. With over 500 horsepower in factory trim and far more with modifications, it would have been an unstoppable force. But the real question is, would the W-43 have changed the entire future of American performance? If Oldsmobile had proven that DOHC technology was the way forward, would we have seen modern muscle cars evolve sooner? Would Chevrolet, Ford, and Chrysler have followed suit decades earlier instead of sticking with traditional pushrod engines for so long? Instead, the W-43 was erased and the muscle car world was left wondering what could have been. But some say this story isn't over yet because one final mystery still remains. The W-43 was never mass-produced. It never roared down Main Street, never lined up at a NASCAR starting grid, and never had the chance to dominate the muscle car wars. But its legend lives on. Oldsmobile engineers built something Detroit wasn't ready for, an American DOHC, 4-valve per cylinder big block decades ahead of its time. And while GM buried it, the ideas behind it didn't die. Years later, GM quietly introduced DOHC technology in Cadillac's Northstar 5V8 and experimented with high-revving multi-valve designs in Corvette concepts. But make no mistake, the W-43 was the blueprint they never admitted to. And then there's the greatest mystery of all. Does a W-43 still exist? Some insiders whisper that at least one prototype escaped destruction, hidden away in a private collection or buried deep in GM's archives, waiting to be rediscovered. If true, it would be one of the greatest finds in automotive history. The W-43 wasn't just another canceled engine, it was the ultimate what-if in American performance, a piece of muscle car history that GM tried to erase but couldn't. And maybe, just maybe, one day, the truth will finally be uncovered.